Last definition. Competitive skaters. This is going to be a longer one, so brace yourself. I talk about competitive skaters a fair amount, and I know I've talked to different coaches about this, and they all tend to have very different definitions of what exactly a competitive skater is. So I want to define it. I have 3 criteria to be a competitive skater. The first is you have to be, this is an easy one to figure out, you have to be in a category that can compete nationally. So that means currently pre-novice, novice, junior, senior are the only national categories. On Canada Games year, you can probably add juvenile into that, and back when there was junior nationals 4 or 5 years ago, you could add juvenile in then as well. Juvenile is no longer, I don't really consider it a competitive category anymore. I don't consider them, it's a competitive category, I don't consider the people in it competitive skaters yet. You can be fairly successful as a juvenile skater without having to adopt any of the mentality that is required for competitive skating. Pre-novice, you cannot. You cannot be a competitive pre-novice skater without kind of changing your approach to skating, changing your dedication level. So that's the first definition. The second definition is, or the second requirement, and these are all required, is that for me to say I've had a competitive skater, you have to have had me as a coach through the competitive season, through the skating season, which starts roughly in September and ends roughly in at the end of your last major event, usually March sometime. There is usually a couple spring sessions. They're not really part of the competitive season. That's kind of post-season. So I'm talking just to the end of the major events. If you end up going to nationals, nationals would be your final event. If you're more provincial level, provincials would be your last major event. I've had 1 or 2 skaters over the years that have, I got partway through the season, and then either I moved away, or they moved away, or in some cases we parted ways in the middle of the competitive season, and I don't consider those on my record as my competitive students, because I had one in particular many years ago, Jordan, who I mentioned before, who qualified at sectionals for junior nationals, and about a month and a half later I stopped coaching him. Junior nationals was 4 months later. So then I can't, and I believe that he was going to medal at junior nationals. Looking back, I didn't know it at the time. Looking back, he would have medaled at junior nationals, but because he wasn't with me for 3 months, he didn't. He came near the bottom of the heap, and I can't. Obviously, I'm not going to count that record as one of my competitive skaters, because he went 3 months without coaching from me. And I believe I had him on a much different path, much different progression than what he ended up being on. And the last criterion is that, and this is kind of a big one, but it's also a little more subjective. To be a competitive skater, you have to kind of give me the tools I need to actually do what I want to do with you. And that doesn't mean giving me absolutely everything I need all the time, although there are coaches that manage to get their skaters and parents to do that for them. I've never quite understood that. It's always a struggle and pulling teeth to try to get my skaters to, with the exception of Emily. Emily and her mom were very keen, and if anything, they would drag me further into doing more for her skating than the other way around. But most of my other students, it was me trying to get them to commit more time, more effort, more. I was saying I need a minimum of 2 hours a week of lessons, and it would be hard to get even an hour for most of these kids. So if the regular sessions aren't giving me enough lessons, and I state that, I expect those competitive kids to get either extra sessions or private ice, which in Labrador was really the only option. There were no other sessions. And I know here in Halifax there are a lot of coaches that get private ice or ticket ice or extra ice to give their students extra lessons. My students don't do that a whole lot. They just buy extra sessions, which works at lower levels. But that's fine. So all 3 of these criteria need to be met for me to consider the person a competitive skater of mine. To be on record as one of my competitive skaters. They have to be at a national level. They have to be with me for the whole competitive season, committed to me for the whole competitive season, and committed to at least meeting most of my minimum criteria for what I expect of them as a competitive skater. And just for reference, of those, I've only had 2 skaters ever that meet those 3 criteria. One was Joey, who ended up going on to medal at every national all 3 national events he did that year, and yes, I'm counting Eastern Challenge as a national event because it was against Quebec and Eastern Ontario, which are the 2 strongest sections. So tough. I'm counting that as a national event. So he did 3. He was eligible for 3 national events. He went to 3 national events. He medaled at 3 national events. And the second competitive skater I've had is Emily, who was eligible for 5 national events, I think. Qualified for 4 of them. Was top 10 at Junior Nationals. Was top 10 at Canada Games. And was middle of the pack in the other 2. So she was never really in the C group at all, which is great. So that's, you know, there's not too many coaches out there that I know of that have that kind of success with their competitive skaters. I'm totally off topic here. But I don't really know the insides and outs of skaters, of coaches and their relationship with their skaters. I don't know if the coaches are saying, I need to see you 3 hours a week, and then they're getting 1 hour a week. So it's really hard from an outsider to view that. I mean, I know I have 3 or 4 skaters that would be considered competitive skaters by other coaches or other people, but they failed to meet one of my criteria, or 2 of my criteria in some cases, so I don't consider them my competitive skaters at all. I don't consider them part of my results of competitive skaters. And I can go into that. I mean, there are 3 or 4 that are debatable that I'm not counting. So when I talk about, well, never mind. So when I talk about competitive skaters, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody who meets all 3 of those criteria. And by the way, my minimum criteria of what I expect of a skater to be successful is not very high. I mean, we're literally talking 2 or 3 hours of lessons, 8 hours of ice time. And I know other coaches that expect 6 or 7 hours of lessons, 8 hours of lessons, and 15 to 20 hours of ice time. So what I need, the tools I need to create success, unparalleled success, are very minimal. For competitive skaters. Bye.